Edward Ted Poole took part in Operation Tonga, the airborne assault undertaken by the British 6th Airborne Division as part of the D-Day landings. After parachuting in over Ranville, Ted commanded 5 Platoon B Company, the 7th Parachute Battalion, tasked with preserving the eastern flank of the Allies' bridgehead from the German 716 Infantry Division and elements of the 21st Panzer Division, attacking the hamlet of Le Port. During the next 12 days, Ted took several German gun emplacements, one single-handed, but on the 18th of June he was seriously wounded by mortar fire. In these extracts from his interview, Ted tells his D-Day story.
The gliders went in just after midnight on the 5th, 6th. We landed about 20 past midnight. I was in a Sterling with 20 of my chaps. I had a kit bag on my leg with a J-type rubber dinghy in it, in case the Ox and Bucks glider party had not managed to stop the bridges being blown. And I'd always been slightly nervous whenever we'd done training jumps. I mean, it didn't stop me jumping, but I was very lucky running in. I got so much to think about, I wasn't nervous. And I would jump first in my stick. First of all, I had to throw out a folding bicycle on its own parachute. Then I jumped. And luckily, as soon as I'd learned my kit bag, there was a flash of an explosion, and I could see the Ranville church, which I knew from my briefing had a separate tower from the actual church. And so I knew exactly where I was. I was quite a long way from the battalion rendezvous, but I knew exactly where I was. So I put my rubber dinghy and the sack on my shoulder, had my Sten gun ready, and started to try and run as fast as I could, but with this huge sack, towards the rendezvous. And I was very lucky because although we were very scattered because of the high wind and also some of the dropping was rather inaccurate, but my platoon, I think I had at least 3/4 of my chaps turned up at the rendezvous. We heard the signal that the bridges were safe. This must have been about 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, there was fire going off all the time on the DEZ actually, but I was fairly lucky. I was sent to try and take Le Port, which was over the bridges on the road to Weestrom, on the west side of the bridges. And I think the whole battalion moved off. All these timings are argued by various people, but about 1:30 I doubled across the bridges where I saw our brigadier Poet. I passed over the bridges, and then there was a crossroads leading up to Le Port and Weestrom, but I avoided the crossroads because I thought it would be under fire, and crossed some fields to get into Le Port. Well, we ran into some Germans the other side of the hedgerow crossing the fields. I slung a grenade, 36 grenade over the hedge. I heard someone running away with some pain. And we got over the hedge and advanced on the port. There were some German snipers in the church tower. When it became daylight, I tried to dislodge them. I remember the church wall with 3 or 4 chaps I'd selected. We got inside the church, but of course they rolled grenades down the stairs. I remember going back over the wall, my pouches got caught on the top, and I was expecting to get a sniper's bullet. Moved up into a woodland. I managed to get over without being wounded. And there was a farmhouse, a building in the woods, obviously very strongly held German quarters. And I was sent on a reconnaissance patrol with 3 or 4 of my chaps. And with one of my snipers, we managed to get right up a ditch to within probably 200 meters of the farm or buildings and observe. And we reported back. And the next day it was decided by Brigadier Poet that we'd attack. And his plan was that first of all they would have an artillery barrage on the farm to keep their heads down. And anyway, they put down this enormous barrage, and needless to say, it just woke them up. So actually, when we went into the attack, they were all alerted, as we expected. And as we moved in, I noticed German machine gun post. So my wireless operator and I moved around to shoot it up, just on across tracks. And I gambled that they wouldn't have ranged across tracks, they'd be on something else. But unfortunately, I was wrong. We managed to shoot up the machine gun post, but I heard this amazing groaning noise that these multiple mortars made. And I was caught by one mortar, and my wireless operator was killed outright. I fell over with my foot hanging off, and a hole through there. But when I realized it was blood in my trousers and not the other thing, I was quite relieved. And anyway, one of my sergeants, the chap, a frightfully good chap who won the DSC later on, Sergeant McCambridge, I should say that I had smoke grenades in my pouches and they cracked. So I was being burned by some phosphorus, which wasn't very pleasant. Anyway, he came and got my equipment off and organised to get me into the battalion headquarters. And I was on a stretcher between the colonel and the doctor. And I heard the doctor say to the colonel, well, it's not worth getting a jeep up the road for old Ted. Well, I suppose he thought I was unconscious. But anyway, eventually the jeep did come up the road. I was in the field dressing station. The doctor said to me, I'm going to have to cut off your nice boots, and I'm afraid your foot with it. And so when I eventually woke up, I knew that I'd lost my foot. Anyway, a hospital ship arrived with nurses from Queen's Alexander's nursing home. Seeing these girls was a great relief. And that was that. I thought I might be able to get back to the battalion. Obviously I wasn't going to be allowed to do any fighting, but I could be an administrative officer and I'd be among my friends. The War Office were frightfully slow, and I had to have another operation on my leg to tidy it up. So by the spring of 1945, I had been fitted up with a leg. I wasn't allowed to go back to the battalion. Once I got out of hospital, I was involved in training parachutists while the war was still on. Thoroughly enjoyed my career in the army, and I've always regretted that I was unable to stay here, and I think I'd have either been court-martialed or a major general.
Please help to rescue and preserve more memories of the Second World War. Visit www.war-experience.org.